Hello, and welcome to today's special webinar event on Kubernetes, data loss, and security breaches when bad things happen to good people. Today's webinar is sponsored by Trilio and Red Hat and produced by ActualTech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from ActualTech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, there are a few things you should know about this webinar. First off, we want this to be an informative presentation for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. There's a link to a download of a free trial with Trilio, a link for getting started with Trilio, and a link to visit the Red Hat Marketplace. You'll also find links to the ActualTech Media Guerrilla Guide Book Club and a link to the ATM Event Center, where you can learn about more events like this one. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask questions of our expert presenters. And to help encourage you to ask those questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the very best question. So at the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. So I'm pleased to be joined by two great speakers today. We have Ben Morrison, who's a solutions architect with Trilio. And we have Jacob Gay, who's a solutions architect with Red Hat. So Ben and Jacob, welcome. Thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Scott.
Yeah, likewise.
So Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll step away until the Q&A portion.
Okay, sounds good. So as Scott said, we're going to be talking about today Kubernetes data loss and security breaches. And so we're first going to be listening to Jacob talking about the Red Hat side of things, and then I will cover more of the data protection, backup, and recoverability side with Trilio Vault for Kubernetes. And I do think that this is very appropriate timing in a way. So Jacob and I, as we were preparing for this, came across an article of, I'm from San Francisco, and the San Francisco 49ers just were unfortunately victims of a ransomware and malware attack just last week. So it's very relevant in the news today and in the tech world today of these ransomware attacks and malicious actors trying to cause these security breaches and take data from organizations. And so I think this will be very relevant with our talk today. And as Scott said, I also hope that we get a lot of good questions coming in here. So I hope to hear from everyone. But with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Jacob, and I'll let you take it away with Red Hat.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it. Happy to be here and really excited for this conversation. As you said, it's very relevant to today, including the 49ers and all the different news events we've heard about our supply chain over the past year or so. And greetings, everyone. Again, my name is Jacob Gay. I'm a solutions architect at Red Hat, supporting our alliances and partnership independent software vendor ecosystem, which stands for ISV. Thrilled to join you today with our friends from Trilio to discuss Red Hat OpenShift. Most importantly, how the Red Hat OpenShift application platform is the foundation for digital transformation initiatives, such as cloud native deployment, and combined with Trilio's data protection solutions, can deliver a robust and secure enterprise application platform for all your cloud native deployment development needs. But just to start, we definitely want you to think about where you are, where's your business in their cloud journey, in their data hosting journey. Because in order to thrive in the face of increasing competition, disruption, organizations must become digital leaders. Organizations that do not establish a leadership position in these digital transformation initiatives risk losing market share and industry relevance, resulting in diminished financial performance and possible failure. And not including all of this, you still have to protect your valuable data from nefarious actors such as ransomware and data breaches, as has been just alluded to with the 49ers. But all of this is also happening around one of the most significant pandemics in our history. While IT leaders have been pursuing these digital transformation initiatives for some time, they need to offer innovative consumer experiences at a critical level. The COVID-19 pandemic has heightened the urgency of digital transformation as businesses were forced to transition overnight from in-person solutions to contactless sales and services. Providing digital consumer experiences has become the only viable business model moving forward. And these new business models place consumer and business data outside traditional data center models. So we must pivot to new and innovative solutions to protect the business as well as the consumer. And these changes are more than just about the technology. To truly transform into an agile, responsive, modern organization requires changes from both the business and IT together to be successful in this era of disruption and digital transformation. And in order to do that, we need to think about a few questions we need to ask ourselves. And that's all about capabilities and things we want to be able to achieve. And those are you able to answer the demand for new and better applications? Are you able to modernize your infrastructure, take advantage of cloud resources, innovative technologies so you can move more quickly? Make the cultural and process changes to support these new ways of working. Because it doesn't matter how amazing and efficient your apps and infrastructure are if the processes still contain the old bottlenecks and manual approvals that slow you down. And again, all of this is wrapped around with data protection and integrity in mind. And security must be wrapped around this as a 24/7, 365 goal, as we've all seen in the news lately, unfortunately, right? And this is critical for every business, agency, etc. Not just the supply chain, not just the San Francisco 49ers. And Ben will spend some time exploring this topic more in depth, but really we just wanted to show you that the security is a continuous process. It's a life cycle approach that doesn't end with putting your application out into the marketplace. It starts with the design process, but after you've published this application and adapted to the way this application runs into the production workload, it's a continuous monitoring process. You must continually check with your application to make sure that it is protected and that the data is secure and that the data has integrity. It's not all about losing the data, but also the manipulation of your data is also critical when these systems and information are very important to serving people and to delivering key services in the economy today. And surrounding all of those different pieces that we just talked about with the continuous iteration of the security lifecycle, we've now introduced all these different techniques for developing software, such as cloud native development. And this requires a different mindset for data protection and security as well. As you can see here, we've bucketized it into three main themes: control, defend, and extend. And that starts with building the code in a secure manner in your pipelines, ensuring that you're not introducing vulnerabilities immediately, but still defending that infrastructure after applications are put into production. But also, most importantly, you have to extend your capabilities, and that's where Trilio really comes into shine for us on the OpenShift platform. Is that leveraging our partnership and our joint value proposition, we're able to extend our capabilities outside of the tools and components that we have in our platform, but we're able to integrate them with Trilio's data protection solutions to develop a enterprise and secure platform that can serve all of our customers' needs, various of industry and use case. And we just want to spend some time talking about the challenges that you face if you do try to go out and do this yourself, right? We understand that startups may not have the resources to run out and have an OpenShift platform day one, but we still believe that's the right process. And then we'll talk more about some of the offerings that we have now that reduce the complexity to get OpenShift up and running day one, as some may have thought otherwise. And that is all about decomplicating these processes, as you see by the key bullet points around the stack, that this is a very challenging process to build an enterprise capable platform to host cloud native applications and to orchestrate Kubernetes in a secure manner. If you do this, you will spend more time with your engineers focusing on building their tool chains and capabilities and fixing these tool chains and capabilities instead of solving business problems. And that's where we need our talents in technology and business to focus today. We need them spending time focusing on business challenges, not necessarily building out platforms, right? And we can do this with OpenShift. It's the Kubernetes platform powered by the hybrid cloud from Red Hat. But as you can see here within this tech stack overview, we give you all the different services and components that you need to run your applications and developer tools to help make apps and do it in a scalable fashion that's also supporting for enterprise production mission critical applications. And we've recently added additional features. If you're not familiar with OpenShift, it's not just Kubernetes, right? We give you the platform services, the developer tools, data services, and etc., to give your developer the power they need to build applications and roll them out into production faster. And in addition to that, we have advanced security features with our recent addition of the StackRox company. And in addition, we have multi-cluster management capabilities. So if you have preferential choice of where you'd like to host your workloads, OpenShift unlocks the capability for you to put your workloads to whichever hyperscaler or private cloud all at the same time and give you that single pane of glass visibility into your workloads to give you that freedom of choice, so that you don't spend time focusing on which data center location to use. We focus on which one is best for your customer and your business. And as you can see here, we're compatible across all the different popular platforms, and we'll spend some more time discussing that on the next slide with our recent new managed service products. They're available on Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, the IBM Cloud, on-premise Google Cloud as well, with our OpenShift dedicated service. And we see this as a game changer for our customers, because those that are already invested in contracts or committed spends with the cloud providers, they have the ability to leverage OpenShift through their marketplace in order to meet those demands and to accelerate their time to production with these new applications and innovative ideas, instead of waiting to build out tool sets around these hyperscalers in order to get their application software out into the ecosystem and into production. So this is a really exciting time for OpenShift. People here at Red Hat are very excited about these products, and we hope you take the time to research and test these out, because they're very exciting for us. And before we pass it over to Ben, I just always like to level set with just a little bit of a thought to walk away with, and that here is, it requires a change of mindset. If you're back at the very first slide about where you are in your journey, if you're still in legacy tech, don't be discouraged, but definitely think about the mindset of your company and your tech strategy, and that knowing that this is a watershed moment for your ability to quickly respond and to adapt during one of the biggest eras of disruption, whether that's technology or the way we do business because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And you need the ability to quickly create individualized consumer experiences while still maintaining integrity of your data and assets. And IT is in a unique position to champion, lead, and implement these digital solutions successfully and securely. However, in order to integrate vast amount of data, apps, APIs, integration problems must be overcome. And the aim here is to increase integration and operability speed while reducing IT spend, resources, and manual processes. Integrating with a cloud-native solution such as Red Hat OpenShift, hosted on hybrid cloud infrastructure with pre-built integration solutions, is the quickest path forward. And with the future of the business on the line, IT has this opportunity to lead albeit with a different mindset focused on innovation as well as data protection. So I want to thank you for the opportunity just to talk a little bit about OpenShift and the value proposition it offers you in your cloud native deployment needs, as well as tech innovation and application modernization, but most importantly, data protection of your Kubernetes deployments. And I'm now going to pass it over to Ben. He's going to discuss Trilio's data protection solution, how together Red Hat and Trilio offer this joint value proposition to meet your cloud native hosting and data protection needs. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ben. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. So now that we've gotten a little bit from Jacob at Red Hat, once you have your clusters getting set up on OpenShift, then it's that next step in the cycle, right? Or next step in the process in terms of making sure that that data and those applications are protected in a disaster recovery sense. I especially like Jacob's slide of the control, defend, and extend. And I think that iterates it perfectly in terms of these security plans and disaster recovery plans. Your whole look on security is never going to be just one solution. It's going to be a combination of multiple solutions in the Kubernetes ecosystem, and then a plan on how to execute those solutions to make sure you are protected. So thank you so much for that, Jacob. We'll get into talking about Trilio Vault for Kubernetes. So I'll start off right where Jacob essentially left off in terms of this transition we're seeing now, especially accelerated by the pandemic we've seen in the past couple of years, but was already on its way towards this path well before the pandemic as well. Before, we used to have traditional data protection technologies that were compatible with more traditional environments for the cloud in terms of just VMs instead of running applications on clusters and on Kubernetes. And so before we had that application OS dependence, we had much more siloed solutions because they were fitting those monolithic applications, and you rarely had a lot of change happening. You had your solution fitting your environment, and there wasn't a lot of dynamic nature to it or flexibility. Also, much more focused just on storage and data volumes. These older data protection technologies we're not focused on making sure the application is up and running as it should be. It was much more focused just on the data itself, and then everything beyond the data, the application itself, you have to figure out how to get it back up and running. Now in the cloud native world, and what we're seeing today and growing more and more every day, is more of that modular microservices oriented approach, right? In terms of being very highly scalable, much more dynamic. And so you have to have a solution that can fit these different dynamic environments for however you're molding them in their uses. We want something that's highly automated. You don't have to want to go in and have to do a lot of manual backups, restores, or maintenance of your systems themselves. And so something that's highly automated and driven through that Kubernetes API. And similar to highly automated, that policy driven aspect as well, in terms of having one policy for your whole backup and recovery plan, and having multi-tenancy fit into that, having multiple users be able to reuse policies to make sure you have consistency while still allowing individuals to execute their backups and restores however they wish. And so in this thought process of moving towards more of that cloud native application approach, we look at Trilio Vault for Kubernetes. And so first and foremost, Trilio Vault for Kubernetes takes the approach of being application centric in our backups and restores. With TVK, by all means, you can back up an entire cluster or infrastructure of the cluster itself, like the etcd. But because solutions like OpenShift are so easy to spin up a new OpenShift cluster literally within minutes, we found that the real crux of the issue is once you have that new OpenShift cluster spun up, how do you make sure you have all of your applications that were on the old cluster now running on the new cluster? And more importantly, how do you make sure that the data from the old cluster gets to the new cluster exactly as it was in a certain point in time? So this is where Trilio Vault for Kubernetes really hones in on. Through this application-centric approach, you can back up all of the data, of course, in those persistent volumes, but also all of the metadata and all of the Kubernetes objects that are needed for that application to run. And you can select this data, metadata, and objects from 4 different ways with TVK, and that is the Helm chart you use to deploy that application or workload, the operator used to deploy that application or workload, as well as the operator used to manage your application, the labels of all of your different objects associated with a certain application, and then, of course, an entire namespace, which is very, very common because so much work today on Kubernetes is done based on that namespace level. TVK is also native to Kubernetes and OpenShift in terms of being packaged as an operator and then deploying custom resource definitions directly into the API. So with TVK, you can literally use kubectl, get backups, get restores, or OC, get backups and get restores, because we integrate directly with the OpenShift API as well. So not only does this make it easier for you to just use that OC command with Trilio, in terms of the CLI, but also it makes it easier to integrate Trilio with other operators or solutions that you've brought into your OpenShift cluster, because all you need is for that solution to talk directly with the OpenShift API. It can then talk to TVK very easily. This gets into that enterprise class and ecosystem tooling portion as well in terms of the API. But also we've gone above and beyond in making sure that we have a variety of capabilities such as hooks, restore transforms, and policies to make sure that you can customize and scale your backup and recovery plan with all of your OpenShift clusters. So the hooks simply being pre and post triggers before and after a backup occurs. This helps you have application consistency essentially with any of your databases and quiescing those databases and putting them in a backupable format. The restore transforms would be if you're moving from one environment to another with some differences of infrastructure. Maybe you're using 2 different OpenShift clusters with different storage classes, maybe, or that are based on a different CSI driver. Then you can do a transform to make sure that that application knows how to adjust to the new environment. And then getting into Prometheus and Grafana also would be more of those third-party tools that are connecting directly to the OC, or to the OpenShift, API, and then therefore connecting to Trilio. Really quickly here, Trilio is very, of course, easy to try to install. You can bring us in from the operator hub in OpenShift for a 30-day free trial for free for a cluster that is 10 nodes or less, or 20 CPUs or less. And then beyond that, of course, there's that enterprise edition licensing with Follow the Sun 365 24/7 support. We have a management console, which we will not have in a demo today, but we'll talk a bit about this in terms of how you can manage your backups and restores with that easy click-driven workflow, essentially trying to take the approach of Kubernetes in terms of customization and orchestration of however you want to build your backup and recovery solution, but adding in the simplification as well and getting rid of some of the noise. And then lastly, infrastructure compatibility and certification. We do require a CSI driver with snapshotting functionality, but if you're using OpenShift and using any of the OpenShift CSI drivers, you should be good to go there, because they're all, their newest versions all have snapshotting, which is incredible and makes one more step for that easy integration between OpenShift and Trilio. And then beyond that, we also have some certifications here. Of course, Red Hat being our first and more major certification, but any CNCF certified distribution you are able to run Trilio onto as well. So for example, if you were migrating from upstream Kubernetes into an OpenShift environment, you could use Trilio to then bring in workloads from that upstream to OpenShift. So as I mentioned, you can get TVK from the operator hub in Red Hat. This also means that your operator of your instance of Trilio will be managed by the OLM, the Operator Lifecycle Manager in Red Hat, which just adds for easier rolling updates essentially. And if for some reason you weren't going to go that route, then you could, of course, get Trilio using Helm v3 and accessing our Helm repository through GitHub. So now, so we'll go a little bit deeper then into the Trilio and Red Hat integration. So now once you have Trilio running in your OpenShift cluster, what are some of the key compatibilities that you're going to see there in order to go one step further, get to that extend stage of your journey in terms of bringing in ISVs like Trilio to make sure you're properly protected? So for OCP, in addition to that deployment into the operator hub and managing by the OLM, you actually also have the ability to manage your backups and restores of Trilio right through that OCP dashboard as well. So when you go in and look at the operator itself, you'll see the usual YAML files of as you would with any operator. But then as you continue on, you can see your backups and your restores and your targets where you're storing your backups. You can see your policies. You can see your hooks all right through the OCP dashboard as well. So now normally, if you weren't using OpenShift, you would have your CLI and the Trilio management console that you can access Trilio from. However, with OpenShift, you have that third option. You also have the OCP dashboard as well. And then secondly, as I mentioned before with OpenShift Data Foundation, Trilio easily integrates with out of the box with the CSI driver. So you'll be able to leverage snapshotting with the CSI driver as well, and very minimal additional configuration needed on your end once you deploy Trilio through the operator hub. So now that we've looked a bit about the integrations of TVK and OpenShift, now let's look more into the in-depth of Trilio Vault for Kubernetes itself and how we work in protecting your data in that backup, restore, and disaster recovery sense. So first and foremost, you have the control plane of the TVK architecture. And this is, of course, just the back end, managing all of those custom resource definitions, managing the web UI and the scheduling, the API. Once you get past this, then you have the data plane of the TVK architecture. And this is all of the objects, all the metadata of your application that's important to capture. Remember before we talked about traditional solutions only capturing data. Here with Trilio, we capture your metadata, the objects as well, to make sure that the application is running just as it was before. So this includes deployment, secrets, config maps, and these are all captured using what we call as a meta mover pod. Trilio spins up pods to execute jobs like backups and restores, and then spins back down when it's not being used to adhere to those Kubernetes principles and to act more as an operator and a lot less as an agent. And so this meta mover pod, when it's spun up, it captures all of your metadata in JSON format and then stores it onto either an NFS, S3, or also if you wanted Azure Blob backup target. From there, once it is stored, then it can be recovered into any other cluster. And once the metadata is backed up, then Trilio goes into backing up the data of your stateful application, that data in that persistent volume. And so two main things I want to address here in terms of how Trilio does this with the data mover pod. One, we have something called incremental forever or incremental backups that you can do through Trilio. So let's walk through a scenario here. So let's say on your OpenShift cluster, you've deployed your first application and you want to start backing it up using TVK. On day one, you're going to do a scheduling backup of a daily backup. Let's see, a backup every single day. So on day one, you'll have a full backup of the entire persistent volume, of course, and all of the data in that PV. Store it onto the target, and you're good to go from there. On day two, you can elect to do a incremental backup. So what this does then is Trilio looks at the data that was captured on day one and compares it to the current data on day two, compares the two of them, and then only backs up the changes in data that have occurred from that day one to day two. So this has a variety of benefits. It means that you have less storage, or you're optimizing essentially your storage onto your target to prevent any additional costs that would not be needed. It means that you don't need a deduplication solution. All of your data is already deduplicated. It's already unique in terms of not having repeated data from those full backups. And then it also means that you have less data going through your network, less bandwidth. If you have a OpenShift cluster that is more on the edge or has limited network connectivity, then you have less bandwidth going through your network. And that means that it's much quicker to do these backups themselves. And the second point I want to make here is that QCOW2 file format. This is how Trilio backs up data in those persistent volumes. And the key here is that it's a non-proprietary Linux industry standard file format. So if you have any additional tools that you're getting from the Operator Hub that interact with QCOW2 files, of course, you'll be using Trilio to create those QCOW2s and restore them in the DR sense. But maybe you have a malware scanner or something else that you want to use on those QCOW2 files. You'll be able to do this because it's in a non-proprietary file format. I'll go back one here. So now we've talked a bit about that architecture. Now, when you deploy Trilio and those custom resource definitions are deployed into the OpenShift API, what exactly does this mean and what are these? So first you have your target, which is that NFS S3, or now with our latest release, your Azure Blob as well, if you wish, to store your backups onto. This is the first custom resource definition that you can interact with. Next, then you have your policies. That's the frequency of your backups. Like in our daily example, you can, of course, make a policy to automate backups every single day or down to the minute if you wish to. And then we also have backup retention policies. A very important aspect of backup and restore and security is also compliance. And backup retention policies definitely fit into that compliance mold. Depending on your industry, sometimes backups can only be kept for a limited amount of time. Sometimes backups have to be kept for a certain amount of time. And so whatever that compliance might be, or maybe just your own internal organization compliance, you can fit a backup retention policy to fit that mold. Hooks would be how you can back up essentially any containerized database out there. You can put in pre and post triggers before and after a backup occurs to quiesce that database and put it in a backupable format if you need to. This is by no means always required. All three of these, target, policy, and hook, then fit into the backup plan, which is your blueprint for your backup, what you want to back up and where you want to store it to. You then, of course, have the backup operational CRD and then the restore operational CRD. And as I mentioned before, everything you see here can be executed through that OpenShift OCP dashboard. So now talking about that granularity of what you want to back up. That's a major theme you'll start to see here with Trilio, is we want it to be customized and granular. So you're only backing up what you need to and nothing more, because more means essentially more costs. So first and foremost, we have labels. Custom labels would be the most common way to back up an application. Simply selecting the label assigned to multiple objects that correlate with an application, backing up that label, and then be able to restore all of those objects. Trilio automatically populates these labels when you go into the management console, so you can see a list of all the labels within your cluster, and from there select what you want to back up. You can also back up based on Helm chart, as I mentioned before. And the unique aspect here is not only does it back up all the data and metadata and objects associated with this Helm chart, but also backs up the Helm chart itself and then restores the Helm chart itself and all its revisions when you have that restore process occur. Same goes for operators. It actually backs up the operator itself and any custom resources needed to run that application, like automated updates, for example. I think the operator is obviously very important when it comes to OpenShift because so many solutions are accessed through that operator hub. And then lastly, on the top here, the namespaces. Of course, you can back up an entire namespace if you wish to. But the reason why I'm addressing this last here is because, again, you can get very, very granular. You can say, I want to back up XYZ namespace as well as this label in a different namespace or a cluster scoped resource. You can say, I want to back up this entire namespace as well as the Helm chart used to deploy some applications in this namespace, or the operator used to deploy some applications in this namespace. So again, getting very granular and over encompassing of the other three. Oh, excuse me, I skipped one. Sorry about that. Here, then we'll move into the management console. Here, as I said, we'll have no demo today. I also encourage any OpenShift users out there to check out Trilio management through OCP as well, because it's very slick. But here is the Trilio provided management console that we have for managing your backups and restores. First off, we have this application discovery. As I mentioned before, all of these labels are automatically populated. You can see on the right here, this honeycomb cluster that we have in here. These are all different applications. They're all different labels that are associated in this certain namespace that we're in this example. And so right when you log in, all of your namespaces, all of your labels, all of your Helm charts, actually all of your objects in general can be viewed in this honeycomb view. And so you can easily select what you want to back up, and you can also see what is successfully backed up and what maybe is unprotected and what has been backed up but was not backed up successfully and why that backup might have failed. This is all real time throughout across your different clouds, and you can look at all of your different clusters within this one pane of glass by adding in clusters into the same pane of glass. So you have that real-time view, as well as those real-time metrics of the monitoring. Those simple workflows, like I mentioned before, one example of this would be our disaster recovery planning tool, which allows you to build out a plan to restore a backup, even if you don't have access to the source cluster where that backup was initially created. You can still access the backup using this tool and restore it into an entirely different cluster if needed. And also adding in all of those transforms and exclusions if you need to. That gets into that migrate piece that's next there. Easily migrate applications from one cluster to another, or one cloud entirely to another, all in the same pane of glass. Monitoring, as I mentioned, and then also a quick mention here of the Valero visibility as well. If you're just now getting into building out your Kubernetes environments and you're following some of the steps that Jacob mentioned in terms of the extend, getting beyond your distribution and finding other solutions out there to protect your data, you may have come across Valero. And so Valero is a great open source solution for backups and restores, but it is it's very beginner. It's very bare bones. You know, it doesn't have the scalability and everything that a fully mature solution like Trilio has. And so if you start off with Valero and then you deploy Trilio in that same environment, you can actually use Trilio to still look at your Valero backups and restores. You still have monitoring of your Valero backups and restores, just to make for that easy transition as you switch from one to the next. Because of course, with data protection, you don't want anything to be missed. You don't want any gaps to occur when you do some of these transitions. So now that we know some of this background, some of the integration, and what that management console looks like, what is TBK really used for? So of course, first and foremost would be that backup and recoverability, managing or scheduling those backups to automatically occur. Essentially, once you set up that process, you can let it run in the background and have those backups automatically occur, as well as the retention policies, clean up backgrounds when there are no backups, when they're no longer needed. And then of course, recovering to that cluster, that namespace when something goes wrong. Disaster recovery, you can use that disaster recovery planning tool to restore those backups across different clouds and across different clusters. You can use Trilio for compliance and governance, as I mentioned, very much so with those retention policies. If you're required to have backups or required to only keep backups for so long, you have all those features ready to go in Trilio in terms of making sure that you are within compliance in your industry. We have ransomware protection and recoverability as well, which of course is one of the major themes of our talk today. So with ransomware, we as an organization decided to follow the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is an internationally recognized framework for best practices when combating ransomware. So we aligned the NIST cybersecurity framework pillars to our capabilities, essentially, in our roadmap, to make sure that we're adhering to this detect and mitigate and monitor and then recover piece of the NIST cybersecurity framework. So within there, we have a lot of different benefits that you get, but I think that one of the biggest differentiators with Trilio would be the immutability and the encryption. Through Trilio and through using S3 targets, you can encrypt your backups at the actual backup level. So instead of just having that one key to the chest in terms of encrypting your entire S3 bucket, you can encrypt each individual backup with Trilio. And so this level of granularity adds a lot more security. It also allows better cost reduction, again, in terms of encrypting, because encrypted files inherently take up more storage. And so if you don't need to encrypt them all, you don't need to. You can get in that granular approach again. And same thing with immutability. You can make your backups immutable at that backup level so that they cannot be touched or deleted, even by an admin privileged user. So kind of getting back to that 49ers story, unfortunately, hopefully they figure out how to recover all of their missing data. But if they had that immutability feature here, like you have with Trilio, then it wouldn't have been able to be deleted. It's impossible for it to be changed in any sort of way. And so their backups would have been protected, and they could have restored their data within a day to have everything up and running again. And then lastly, then that migration piece, of course, moving from one solution to another, you want to make sure that your data is always protected, and you can move your application data across different clouds if need be. And so you can also use Trilio for a migration use case as well. So now my last piece here, just our compatibility slide, kind of going over everything we talked about. Trilio is distribution agnostic. As long as it's CNCF certified, then you're good to go. Of course, though, you're going to get a lot of extra benefits when using Trilio in an OpenShift environment. With storage, those CSI drivers, we require snapshotting functionality. If you're using any of the Red Hat CSI drivers or using OpenShift CSI drivers, you're good to go on that one. Targets, S3, NFS, and then now recently Azure Blob, you can use to store those backups to store them outside of the cluster itself. A little bit on ecosystem tooling we mentioned. Because we're connected to that OpenShift API, then if your third-party tool can talk to the OpenShift API, then it can talk to Trilio. And then just gets in the theme again of that extend approach, using that ISV ecosystem to customize your security as you need. For databases, the databases you see here are the ones that are certified by Trilio, and we have documentation on in terms of hooks to quickly set up those databases and get them protected. But it is by no means a comprehensive list of everything Trilio can protect. In fact, myself as a solutions architect at Trilio, I am yet to see a database, a containerized database, that could not be protected by Trilio, because we have those hooks that allow such a level of customization. And lastly, of course, we have the same mindset as Red Hat when it comes to being cloud agnostic. So any of the clouds out there, public or private, on-prem, as well as even air-gapped environments, you can deploy Trilio into and back up your applications. So with that, I hope everyone here got a lot of information from Jacob and I in terms of how to get started with Kubernetes and OpenShift, and how to get started with that security protection, and how to go that extra mile and extend to Trilio to prevent data loss and have that data protection piece as well. So at this point, I would love to hear if there's any questions out there. And so we can take a look at the Q&A.
Yeah, great. Yeah, really nice presentation, Ben and Jacob before that. And we do have some questions coming in. The first one I'll mention comes from Shelby. And, you talked a little bit about compliance, Ben, during the presentation. And Shelby's asking, with the automation, how secure is the data compared to HIPAA and GDPR standards?
So it would be however you want to customize it to. First of all, we do adhere to any of the standards out there, but it would be on your end in terms of customizing how you want to, how long you want to retain that data. I know with GDPR, you're only allowed to retain data for a certain amount of time, and so it would be on your end to customize your retention policies and that automation to make sure that the applications are being cleaned up. Of course, it would be best practices to make sure that this is successfully happening on some sort of iterative basis. But essentially, once it's set up, it should be automated, and you shouldn't have issues.
Okay, super. Next question comes from Kelly. Are software slash app updates and backups automatic?
I think updates would be in Jacob's end with OpenShift, but backups, essentially, once you bring in a new application to your OpenShift cluster, you can then go into Trilio and set up those backups to be automatically executed on however often you wish. Beyond this, you can use automation software like Ansible to make sure that once an application is deployed, it automatically kicks off backups with Trilio. I've seen this done, and I've actually done a demo, not on Ansible, but a different automation platform. So you can go an extra level with the automation if you're using some solutions like Ansible.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, Ben, thank you for mentioning the Ansible piece, but also within OpenShift, they have an update service that allows over-the-air updates, depending on your security stance with downloading updates into your environment across the internet. If it's air-gapped, there's other techniques we can deploy to allow you to update your operators or environments with local services as well.
Okay, super. You guys both talked a bit about ransomware, and we had a question from Chris, and maybe it would be good, to kind of hit on that like in one spot. Chris is asking, what role does Kubernetes play in helping prevent ransomware attacks? So maybe Jacob, I'll kick that to you first, and then maybe Ben, if you don't mind, you could come in with the Trilio side of it as well.
Well, just to start off, I just want to clarify that Kubernetes itself is not a security mechanism to block you from an attack itself, right? This is a cloud native orchestration platform. You would need to implement security best practices in order to protect your platform. Now, with that said, obviously legacy technology is a target because of the knowledge base around it. And Kubernetes is still, for most, relatively new, so there may not be as many vulnerabilities or threat vectors on that technology. But you still need to implement technologies such as Trilio's to encrypt your data and to back it up in another location to ensure that if your environment is attacked, unfortunately, in a successful manner, that you can recover. My theory is back up everything, encrypt everything, and then sleep better at night, right? And I'll pass it to Ben for some additional context.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it there, Jacob. It goes to the extend piece, like we just said. Kubernetes doesn't have really any protection against ransomware, besides, I guess, some inherent capability benefits from Kubernetes itself. But you want to see that extension through distributions like OpenShift, and then through ISVs like Trilio as well, to make sure that your data is protected itself. The only piece of I know Kubernetes has encryption in transit that helps with a little bit of that encryption piece, but you need to go above and beyond in terms of encryption at rest, and especially pertaining to Trilio, encryption of your backups at rest.
Super. In Ben, this is sort of a question for me, but you had that use case slide, which was really nice. What's the most common use case? What do people typically, sort of buy Trilio for?
Sure. So I think that disaster recovery is the number one use case in terms of everyone has it on their mind when looking at Trilio or being a customer of Trilio. Sometimes organizations also like that migration piece. They like to not have all of their eggs in one basket when it comes to cloud or distribution. Sometimes they're migrating from one distribution to another. So those are all use cases as well, but all of them then ultimately are going to plan on using Trilio for that disaster recovery as well, once their migrations or movements are completed.
Great. Next question comes from Ted. I guess it's a maybe a philosophical question, but Ted is asking, why have you decided on Kubernetes as a container orchestrator? So I guess, Jacob, I'll kick that to you about, some of the core benefits of it, as opposed to other ways of orchestrating containers.
I mean, yeah, sure. For OpenShift or for Red Hat, right? The reason why we decided to focus in on Kubernetes is this goes back into the journey, and I highly recommend going out to YouTube and watching the Kubernetes documentary that recently came out. Is that when Google built that orchestration platform, we saw the value in it compared to other solutions that are out there. And I'm not going to speak to those other offerings as a competitive, downplay, but we chose Kubernetes because it was the most powerful product out there and innovative product that was available. So we immediately contributed to it with Google, and as you can see now, 5, 6 years later, it's become the industry standard. So because of that, that is why it's incorporated in our OpenShift platform. And again, it's the most powerful container orchestration tool in the market today. So it was I'm sure an easier decision than most when it comes to product design and determination. But again, personally, I was not involved with that determination. But based on my research and my just learning more about the company and how we make decisions, I'm sure there's a lot of thought that went into the usage of the product, the security, the integrity of the product, and obviously the popularity in the developer community.
Okay. Is that the Honeypot documentary about Kubernetes? It looks like just came out like a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, that's it, Scott. Highly recommend it. It's a great view if you're interested in learning more about how Kubernetes got here today. We were a co-sponsor of that. I will mention that, but it talks about the entire story from beginning to end.
Yeah, really interesting. I'll have to check that out. I hadn't heard about it. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Same.
Let's see. Other questions. Here's a question. They're asking, is your backup data secured with multi-factor authentication? So I guess that's a question for Ben. Is there a role for MFA?
Yep. MFA MFA is available to be used with Trilio itself in managing those backups.
Okay. Super. Question from Michael. Is there a good way to get the logs from Kubernetes backend systems and containers into a SIEM such as Splunk?
Yes, that integration does exist. I don't want to distract us from our friends with Trilio, but we do have integration with Splunk, and there is, I believe, an operator in the marketplace, so you can easily deploy that product to leverage it for system event monitoring.
Okay. Next question comes from Ned. He's asking about what organizational benefits are included in the licensing costs of the enterprise edition of Trilio Vault for Kubernetes. And he also had a question about the trial version. So, maybe, just like what's sort of the licensing structure?
Sure. So the licensing is generally based on node size or CPU, vCPU of the cluster itself. It's not based on how much you're actually backing up. We wanted to allow you to back up how much you wished with Trilio. So it's based on the environment size. And then from there, the free trial is a 30-day free trial for any size of cluster. So just for 30 days, however, to use Trilio. There's also the free version that is for a cluster that is either 10 nodes or less or 20 CPUs or less, again, going by the size of that cluster. And then lastly, then you have that enterprise edition licensing. And so I already mentioned node and CPU pricing based on that cluster itself. And the additional benefit that you do get with the enterprise license is our support team as well, which we've gotten a lot of great praise from some big enterprise customers out there on our support team. So they're very excellent what they do. And they're also located all over the world. So at any time of day, any day of the year, you can have access to support with that enterprise license.
Okay, great. And it looks like we're kind of coming up here on the top of the hour, but Ben is, especially if somebody wants to get started with Trilio and Red Hat as a partnership, or find out more, what do you recommend?
So I would say, attending this today was a great way to start. If you're an OpenShift user, then go ahead and get into your OCP dashboard and go to the operator hub and type in Trilio. You can even check off, before you even type that in, you can check off certified operators to make sure you're looking at OpenShift certified operators and solutions, which Trilio would fall under. From there, you can go ahead and do an install of Trilio, or you could also just read more about Trilio there in the operator hub. I believe there's a link to connect you to our documentation, but if there's not, docs.trilio.io is the documentation itself to learn a little bit more about how to get started.
All right. Super. Okay, well, Ben and Jacob, thanks for putting together a really informative presentation and for all your insights today. Really appreciate you coming on and doing this today. This has been very, very informative.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Appreciate it, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
And before we wrap up, we do have one more piece of business. It's the $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $300 Amazon gift card is David Kitch from Texas. So congratulations to David. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the ActualTech media team, I wanted to thank Trilio and Red Hat for making this event possible. And of course, I want to thank all of you for attending and for your great questions. So that concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.